What happens when two seasoned business leaders get together? They talk shop, of course. Sit back and listen in as Scott DeLong and Vince Moiso share from their experience around current issues facing executives, entrepreneurs, and their leadership teams. The CEO Podcast starts now.
A little bit about the CEO Podcast. We are a couple guys that usually bring in a guest and we talk about things that matter in the business world. A lot of times it's on leadership, communications issues, and a lot of times it's on tactical issues. And today might be a combination of the two of those. So I'm glad you're going to pay attention. We're on Spotify, we're on Apple. This one will not be on YouTube since we're remote, but I think it should be fun either way. You can get in touch with us by hitting up Scott and Vince at gmail.com or catch us on any of our social media.
Yeah, I've been coming to the Covering Show for 25 years now. Love-hate relationship with trade shows in general, right? You know, it's something that we got to do in the industry. Coverings is and has always been the largest domestically in the U.S. So it's an incredible show, you know, with the Spanish, the Italians, the Brazilians, everybody converging in one single place, right? And we have a special guest today that I roped in at the last minute because given our topic and what we're talking about today is really maximizing your potential and mitigating risk, right? You know, we're sitting in very, very uncertain times right now, staring at an economy and a recession that could last a few years. And so we wanted to have a discussion on how to plan for that and how to forecast properly. So we've got Bob Leahy from Dow Tile, Vice President at Dow Tile, a longtime industry vet. Bob and I do a little bit of business together as well. And I've gotten to know Bob over the last year. And so, Bob, thank you for joining us today. If you wouldn't mind for our audience, if you could spend a few minutes on your background.
Hey, yeah, sure. Thanks, Vince. And Scott, thanks for having me in today. I've been in the industry over 35 years, so pretty much all my career. And all of that really with one company. So part of the Dow Tile and Mohawk Industries team. And over the course of time, held a lot of different roles in the industry from, you know, working in the field as a center manager to a sales rep, architectural rep. And I've been on the executive leadership team for a couple of decades now in the business with not only Dow Tile, but also the Mohawk side of the business. So it's given me quite a good deal of perspective and learnings, if you will, on a lot of the things you do well and a lot of things you don't do well. And it's preparing for handling the worst to the best of your ability, which is really part of how to handle and move us through the world of uncertainty we're in now. Right?
That's right.
Well, that's a good lead into where we're going today.
No doubt. Well, and why don't I I'll just give some context to what we're talking about and give a little bit of background. So as we talk about the general economy right now, right? I don't have to tell anybody that interest rates are up and the impact that has on the economy. And then inflation continues. So, you know, as a manufacturer, that hits us incredibly hard. So as raw materials continue to rise in cost, we're not getting 60, 90, 120-day notification. We're shooting a PO over and we're getting a response saying, sorry, the prices have increased. So, you know, that impacts business very, very quickly in real time. Consumer spending, while, you know, in the last quarter of 2022 remained relatively flat or, you know, even stronger than you would expect is because there was still a strong job market. But, you know, as we've moved into 2023, I know as a business, we've experienced a very, very soft Q1. And I'm hearing that from most businesses right now. A lot of businesses, even that I talked to today, down 25 to 30% year over year from last year. So we're also in the wake of a lot of layoffs from very, very large companies right now, and consumer spending is slowing. So that's what we're faced with. I'll finish with this because our industry tends to follow annual housing starts, right? So as we look at industry performance, it's measured by that. So we've got high mortgage rates staring at us. We got rising construction costs, which I know we're experiencing, along with a lot of other companies, it's forcing a slowdown on projects, right? So projects are taking a little bit longer, funding is a little bit slower, and projects are even getting pushed out. So you got new construction and commercial that are totally flat, if not slightly down, with residential remodel slightly up. So now, you got all that headwind. Now what?
So before now what, think about back in October, November time period when you were creating the plans for the new year. And most organizations, if they're not doing annual strategic planning, at least you ought to be. And then the first quarter hits you like on the side of the head because you didn't project this back in October.
No, absolutely not.
Right.
No.
So you're building inventory, you're building product for your customers, and then all of a sudden a slowdown that comes unexpectedly. And I've got a plan that we signed off on November 1st that's going to be for the coming year.
Right.
And let's just go forward and do that. No, it's not the way it works.
Yeah, it's interesting as you think about the whole planning process. For our audience out there, think about you have a committed plan that you may give your banker, or you may use for your financial planning. But then you should also have a stretch plan that if things go well, or you have some additional contingencies that can either gap in shortfalls or accelerate you beyond your annual operating plan.
Yep.
And typically, as we think about the cycle, we'll have a plan that we commit to. We'll have a plan as a team that we align on for stretch. And then as soon as we see those early indicators where, the market's not cooperating, you got to move into contingency planning pretty quickly.
That's right.
And you have to be able to control what you can control. You can't control the interest rates. You can't control the consumer persona. But your SG&A and some of those fixed cost areas are the areas you have to control, and you have to make those tough decisions so you can make sure you weather through it and financially, have the wherewithal to work through the troubled waters, if you will, and get to the other side, because there always is another side. And for those of us who have been in the industry for years, we've been up and down through these recessionary periods. And typically, when you emerge from a recessionary period, it's, gangbusters for the flooring industry because you get a lot of pent-up demand. The housing stock is aging. It's never been in what I would call a worse condition in terms of the aging of the housing stock in the U.S. And then on top of that, we're finally getting a lot of the millennials kicked out of mom and dad's, and they're going to go find their own lodging or homes, driving
demand. It's going the other way right now.
Where we're seeing that surge where they're leaving the nest and they got to broaden out and get into their own space. So there's a shortage on housing.
Yeah.
So we have a number of factors at work.
Affordable housing.
Yeah, affordable housing. You have demand in the populace. You have an aging housing stock, which just drives remodeling. So there's still a lot of favorabilities you look out over the next 2 to 3 years, but you just got to weather through. Look, the dip we're going to see, and we're starting.
So let's talk a little bit about that. So what do you do, right? So we have our annual plan, and here it is. The bankers have it. The team's been aligned on it, and then you see the changes. Talk about frequency on the plans and the adjustments that you need to make when you see these indicators. How often is your executive team together, or do you start with the executive team or some other team?
Well, yeah, I'll just give you a general business practice. You should be reviewing your forecasts and your results on a monthly basis.
Good.
No doubt.
Yep.
Because it takes you time to make your adjustments when you've got to alter or pivot. And trends are your friend in most cases. They're going to give you kind of the lay of the land. And obviously you look at your historic trends, start to paint a picture. Is my revenue stream up? Is my square footage out the door the same it was? What's my forward book of business look like as well? As Vince pointed out, are some of my projects moving out because financing is getting tighter? And you have to look at the forward view, the historic view, and you have to blend that art and the science together to make your best guess on how you want to take action. And again, you got to manage your working capital. You got to manage the pieces that you absolutely have control over, which in many cases are your cost basis.
So what disciplines are you bringing into your meetings then? When they say be disciplined, which departments? Is it just the sales and the finance folks? Who comes into the meeting for your
Yeah.
strategic planning
Yeah.
process?
Well, for strategic planning, it's pretty much enterprise-wide because we look at all parts of the business as any business owner should. You need to look at all parts of your business and see where the contributions are, where your profit sanctuaries are, or where your financial drains are. And the whole idea is you want all those areas to work in unison and concert to give you your best outcomes, right? So we typically involve all of our functions in the business as we do our roll-ups or as we look at our business. And, in many cases, we ask all of our business leaders to make sure they bake in contingency planning so that, if we get off track, you can adjust accordingly and still meet your commitments as an organization.
Yeah, and you got to have. I'll pile on there. The leaders that own their respective departments, right? Everybody's got a budget. At least in our organization, there's a budget company wide, and we're going to collaborate. We're going to get together, and I've got to get buy-in, right? Everybody's got to be bought in and running in the same direction, and that's important. That alignment part is incredibly important, at least for our organization.
So to get buy-in, though, you need all these departments to understand the concerns and the needs of the other departments.
Completely.
Right?
Yeah, that's completely right, Scott. And what I'll tell you, what makes that happen is the frequency in which you're meeting on that very topic. And so, we follow, I've talked about this before on our podcast, and we follow a 12-week year. And I've said that many times. And so what that means is for us, a quarter is like a year. So there's a lot of urgency in what we do. So the good news is, with things like this, because you're right, you described us. October, November, we were forecasting and not anticipating that Q1 was going to be as soft as it has been for us. With that said, we're very quick to pivot and make decisions. We're a smaller business too, so we're a little bit more nimble. But in that way, as an organization, because we follow that 12-week year, we're meeting weekly and then every month, right? And so we're just so focused on 30 days and the tasks that we're going to accomplish in those 30 days that it's really easy to make those decisions and get total buy-in from the leadership.
So your strategy's quarterly, but your tactics are weekly.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think it's important to think about communication is across your business. In times of uncertainty, the communication has to go up in frequency. So you have to be real-time decision-making, and you have to be in lockstep with your partners, whether it's your head of sales, your head of installation, your inventory management, your inventory planner, your CFO. Everybody's got to be real-time on the sharing of information and conditions because you have to pivot pretty quickly sometimes. And the faster you start making your moves, the faster you get through whatever that challenge is or get through the hurdle.
Bob, I'm glad you put communications in as part of that process because there's something that I talk a lot about, that you have to not only communicate frequently, you have to communicate in a language that everybody understands, having a common language. Salespeople think one way and talk one way. The accounting folks they have their own language as well, but we need to have an organizational language so that we all understand when we say blue or when we say dog, we know what type of dog, right? Is it a shepherd or is it a poodle, right? So you can't just say, we're going to do a dog this year. But having a common language that everybody understands.
Yeah.
And ensure that people recognize and understand what it is that we're saying. Otherwise, we're just going to be missing out.
Yeah, that gets back to Vince's point about just build the alignment across the organization. And that's really the role of you as the leader of your business, regardless if it's a distributorship, a contracting business, or manufacturer, it starts at the leadership rank. And, the old adage, people are going to follow the leader. And if you have good communication skills and you build the alignments, it's amazing what kind of outcomes you can achieve.
Yeah, well, transparency is one of our values, right? And so we believe in being transparent with our leadership team and our employees. So we use, again, we've talked about this many times on our podcast. We use a platform called Lead with Purpose. Everything from our forecast goals all the way down to profitability of the business is visible to all employees. And to us, that's really critical. There's no way that I think we would be able to get alignment with our leadership team without having that visibility and that transparency. It's wholly important, because if they didn't have a clear understanding of what each of those things meant to the business, then it's pretty hard to have a conversation about cutting costs or cutting expenses or getting rid of something, or hey, we're not going to do that trade show because we can't afford to do that. We can't make that investment because we can't afford to do that right now. With
or what we need to do to hit our stretch for the stretch
or
goals.
whatever it is that we
about.
need to do.
Absolutely.
So, because it might require a higher level of responsibility from any one team member. And I think without having visibility on the big picture and having the transparency of the business all the way down to the financials, I would guess that, you're running blind, and then, you don't know why we're heading in one direction or another.
So you guys mind talking specifics a little bit about the crunch of the industry right now, right? The soft first quarter, what's happening? How would an organization, so you got a distributing organization, it's retail sales plus a manufacturing organization, what might be the differences between how you might plan, Vince, for your side, and Bob, how you might
Well,
plan
they plan both. Dow's also a manufacturer, right? So they've got both, and they're the largest importer in the United States of products. So they've got distribution and manufacturing, and continue. I'm sure Bob and I have talked about this. Dow will continue to scale. Mohawk Industries will continue to scale and grow because they can do that. As a smaller business and manufacturing being our primary function, yeah, it's different because I've got, I always say this, when you're a manufacturer versus distribution, if you're a pure distributor, you can turn the lights off if you want. All you got is inventory. You've got those assets. So you're either making money or not making money as a distributor. As a manufacturer, you're either making money or losing money, because I can't turn the lights off. We fire up the furnaces to make glass. And it can take a week to fire it up, and it takes a week to shut them down. And so you can imagine the cost associated with that. So we've got to keep those furnaces on as much as we possibly can. We got to keep the factory moving as much as we can. So we've got costs no matter what, whether we're making money or not. We've got those costs associated with that. So it's a bigger challenge. And so we're constantly looking at our operational side of the business to see where we can improve efficiency.
Yeah, and again, most businesses, you kind of have three levers of communication as you work on your forecasting. So one's customer view. Talk to your customers about what do they see in the horizon for them, the number of projects, the timing of the projects, the size of the projects, to make sure we're all aligned to the best of our knowledge on the customer intel. And then if you have any sales force, like a distributor will have field sales team members, they're going to give you another data point on how they feel about the business and what they sense the next 90 to 180 days is going to be like. So you take those inputs. And then you work with your internal planning team. In many cases, you have somebody who's doing some of the inventory planning, and you pull that information, and you have to triangulate all of that. And what I would tell you from the sales slant in an organization for a lot of years, they're typically going to be a little more optimistic than the other sides of the business until proven right on their forecast. So generally, as I think about,
I know what you're talking about, Bob.
Yeah,
my forecasts are always right on.
Right on, spot on, aren't they? Yeah. So you think about maybe some handicapping on that data point if you have field organization that's giving you their perspective, and then think about your supply chain partners too. What can they do to help you manage your inventory flows, manage your raw materials, so that you can free up working capital, because cash is king. You're going to want to make sure you stay very solvent.
Yeah.
And the less you have tied up in hard asset inventory, the better off you're going to be. So whether it's have them hold more reserve at their plant or at their distribution center, and you take it on a need-buy basis, or maybe you work with your organization to say, hey, if I've got excess inventory, maybe that's what I want to promote and move. Or if I've got odd lot first quality inventory, maybe that's what I want to liquidate to free up cash. And again, try to just maximize your cash flow, which is a very important piece of the financial story, especially in times where you get a lot of choppiness in the economy.
Yeah, I would argue cash flow is king. Especially that's true in our business. And so cash flow becomes incredibly important. And so there's a couple things that we can do to mitigate things. One is, on the customer side. So as we talked earlier, I tend to be very customer centric. And okay, so how can we get paid faster, right? So that helps us. And simply, sometimes that's just offering a discount, prepaid discount. From an inventory perspective, because we do carry some inventory, we can offer discounts on inventory to entice people to take on more. Even from manufacturing, right? We might, like as an example, we're running into the summer where we're going to get increased natural gas prices again. So we're going to have to go to LNG, and that's going to have a heavy impact. So we'll hit our major distributors up to say, hey, why don't you pre-order in June, whatever your anticipated forecast orders might be throughout the summer. And then we won't hit you with a price increase or a surcharge over the summer, something to that effect. Now, on the back end, we communicate with vendors. And we, again, going back to that value of transparency. So I'm not talking about internal transparency. I'm also talking about external transparency. So our conversations are very open and vulnerable with our vendors as well. So we just let them know what's going on and say, hey, we're anticipating some serious price increases over the summer. Cash flow is going to be really tight. Any help that you can provide us to extend our payment terms is going to be very helpful to our cash flow. So I think you got to be able to have those candid conversations. You got to be willing to have those candid conversations and let people know on both sides. And that has bode very well for us from a cash flow perspective.
So I like the approach, and there's so many companies that are not doing that. When you're talking about the communication piece, it's not just the internal communications and having all the minds from the top floor making all the decisions, getting the information from the salespeople, from the customers, from the vendors. We don't know what our vendors are going to do or how they can help us unless we ask. Right? We can make all the assumptions in the world, but unless we ask and get their perspective, we have no idea whether or not these plans are going to work.
Got to ask the question.
So having that done in advance before we come in to the conference room to work that critical.
I agree.
And not everyone will do it.
We don't always agree, by the way, on our podcast. In this case, I agree. Scott, I'll just say,
an example of alignment.
Yeah, Scott, you're right. He doesn't hear that often.
Thank you. Yeah. Well, I normally hear how old I am, so got that going for me too.
Okay, you are old.
Yeah, thanks.
This is true.
Appreciate it.
Thanks
now
for
we're consistent with so that's the CEO podcast. Scott's old, Vince is young. Scott's wise, Vince is young. Anyway, all right. So let's get back to what we can be doing today. So thinking about the current economic situations in your businesses, what are the key things that you might want to help some of the listeners think about from your point of view?
So I'm going to jump in with one thing because, and Scott, you're going to love me for this. Get a coach. Get somebody from the outside of your organization to come take a look. And while that might sound counterintuitive because you're like, hey, you're just talking about cutting expenses.
It's expensive.
Now we're going to add, an expenses. It's not as expensive as you think it is, especially just to have somebody come in and moderate a strategic plan session. Reality is sometimes you can get so close to a thing, and we are so close to our business that you can't see the forest through the trees. And so, if you've ever spent time with financials like I do, or, forecasting, and you're looking at a spreadsheet, my eyes go cross-eyed. And sometimes I'm locked in and I can't totally see it. And I got to get another pair of eyes on it. And there's no better pair of eyes than someone from outside your organization, because they've got no skin in the game. There's no emotional attachment to what's going on. They can really come in and give you a very, very objective opinion on what to do and an overview of what you've got going on.
So if I can tag on that before we get to Bob's answer to my question, is a coach can do three things for you. From my point of view, three things for you. A coach can help you reframe a situation see it from a different point of view. They can help you see around corners. We used to call those blind spots, but now we're just seeing around corners. And the third thing you can do is that it can hold you accountable. You sit with me with a plan and you don't do it, you're going to hear about it, right? Those are the three things a coach can help you do. Whatever process or system or whatever they use, and they're all going to use one or another. But those are the three things that you should be looking for from a coach. Reframing, seeing around corners, and accountability. So, Bob, back to the original question. What are some things people can think about right now in the current economic situation that might help them from your perspective?
Yeah, sure. One of the first things I would recommend you do is just manage your margins. So, don't be in any big hurry to do a lot of heavy promotion or do a lot of price cutting. Manage your margins because it's the bloodline of the business. 2, you want to, again, just watch your inventory levels and make sure that if you haven't done it already, think about, bucketing your inventory SKUs, A through E. Your A velocity SKUs, you're going to want to over-index on a little heavier inventory because you're not going to get stuck with it and it's going to move and eventually turn. You want to take some money out of probably your D, E, and C SKUs and lighten your position on those because they're slow-moving inventory, and it just helps you kind of rebalance, if you will, where your working capital is invested. And then the other thing you have to think about, too, is we're going to get through this. So how do you make sure you protect your high potentials and high performers in your business?
Good. Yep.
Because your human capital is really your most valuable asset. Because they make the machine run and achieve the results. So you have to be careful of that because in a condition where the market's unsettled, the heightened poaching that takes place across industries or competitors also increases because they're looking for the secret recipe to get them out of the doldrums as well. So
when you couple that with the internal strife that people are feeling when the business goes down, and people start looking, they look around. So protecting your key assets is critical.
Yep. And a lot of leaders spend too much time trying to change the bottom tier of their organization versus hugging and holding and helping to develop the top tier, which you want to have for the long-term success of your business. So that's another little piece of advice. Spend more time and energy on your top half. It's hard to change people once they're beyond, 25, 30 years in age and their habits.
Yeah, I totally agree. I couldn't agree more. I've got, 4 of our peeps sitting in the audience right now, and they're all equally critical to the business. And I hope, I'll just say this because they're sitting in the audience especially, is I hope they know how critical they are to the business, how much they're appreciated. And we try to do the best that we can to hold on to them as much as we possibly can because they are so important to the business.
Well, what you just did is one of the keys to doing that is the recognition and making sure that they understand how important they are to you.
Well, we've got one hell of a recognition system in place. And so I can assure you there is no shortage of recognitions that happen within our company. We recognize each other from every level of the business. And so I think the whole team does an excellent job of that.
Yeah. I like to call it psychic income. So it's not always writing a check to somebody, but there's a lot of different ways that you can recognize someone without just having to give them a check. Think about public praise, private criticism. You think about, value of time off. Give them an extra day off, periodically to just recognize extra efforts or contributions to the business. Have the family go out for a family outing or dinner and pick up the check. There's lots of different ways to recognize your team. And again, I like to call that a big bucket of opportunity, the psychic income that people need, because it isn't all about the paycheck sometimes. They want to feel recognized and part of the team and a contributor to the business. And when you recognize that, wow, sometimes it's absolutely unbelievable what kind of results you see.
Yeah, I agree. I'd be remiss if I didn't talk a little bit about X's and O's, just for a second, just to acknowledge it, and when you have a sales problem, so we're faced with some headwinds and an uncertain economy, and you can't increase sales, or even worse, you've got decreased sales, right, which a lot of us are feeling. There's only a couple things that you can do. I mean, it definitely isn't rocket science. I'm not going to tell you anything you don't already know, but one is to increase prices, which is very difficult to do in uncertain times, and then the other one is cut costs. And so if you're not doing one or both of those things, then at some point that's just going to hit your business, and you may not even be able to come back from it. So you've got to be able to make those decisions. And the reason I say I'm talking about X's and O's in conjunction with what Bob's talking about is I'm going back to get your people involved. Don't make unilateral decisions. It's so tempting to just sit in a vacuum and say, you know what, I got to make the tough decisions. I'm going to do it, and I'm going to cut costs and cut it hard. You got to get everybody involved, and you got to be open about what's going on and allow them not only the collaboration, they deserve the respect of that collaboration, but on top of that is that then you get aligned and you get totally around making those decisions together.
That's good.
Yeah, that's a good observation, Phil. I like to term that you make better decisions through committee, but not by committee.
Yep.
Right? Get the inputs, but make those decisions through committee, but not by committee.
Yep.
All right, guys, it doesn't feel like it, but we're at time now. Things go pretty fast when we're having a good time.
Love it. Good talk today, fellas. Bob, thanks so much for coming on with us today. Appreciate your insights. Just a lot of wisdom that you're throwing out to us today from your experience. Appreciate you very much. Scott, as always, it's always fun to have these conversations with you. Until next time.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Thank you for joining us for the CEO Podcast. Please visit us at theceopodcast.net, where you can learn more about our co-hosts and listen to past episodes. If you would like to have a discussion and dive deeper into any topic, there is also an option to contact Scott or Vince to schedule some time with them. Thanks for listening.